This is Reverse Engineered.
Hey everyone, my name is Jon Penland, and Reverse Engineered is brought to you by Kinsta, a premium managed hosting provider. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Kristen Wiley, CEO and founder of Statusphere. Kristen, welcome to Reverse Engineered.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, well, Kristen, as we get started, can you just introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, so I'm the founder and CEO of Statusphere. We are a platform that connects brands and creators, and we specifically scale consumer to consumer marketing for brands. So we believe that the future of marketing and the largest marketing channel moving forward is going to actually be utilizing the voices of real consumers to talk to others about your brand. And that is what we're building our platform around.
Yeah. So you kind of got into a little bit there what Statusphere is and the market that you play in. I'd like to ask you to spend just another moment there. I suspect most of our listeners are familiar with influencer marketing, but just in case we have somebody listening to us today who doesn't know what influencer marketing is, can you give us kind of a quick definition and then how Statusphere fits into that picture?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you asked that too, because even the term influencer marketing can mean so many different things to so many different people. Also, a little bit more of my background, just so you know where I'm speaking from, is I have been doing influencer marketing, I can now say officially, for 10 years. My first job was reaching out to mommy bloggers in 2010. So I've seen really the evolution of the space in general. And that's one of the reasons I created Statusphere. But yeah, influencer marketing is the concept of getting your product or service into the hands of somebody who influences a buying decision. So we at Statusphere define an influencer as anyone who can influence a buying decision, which is why we've even moved more into what we consider consumer to consumer. Because at the end of the day, almost anyone, has some sort of sphere of influence, no matter how many followers you have. Now, the more like typical way that people view influencer marketing is, sometimes like the Kim Kardashians of the world that have millions upon millions of followers. I think that's like the more traditional kind of older school view of it nowadays, is that, obviously she has a very large sphere of influence, but I personally, and at Statusphere, we define it as anybody who has any influencing power whatsoever. And studies show, and we found that like the smaller micro influencers is what they're called, or people with like smaller actual numbers of followers, actually have more influence. So that's really what we focus on, not on the big macros of the world. So influencer marketing spans that whole gamut of what I just talked about, but we really focus on that, more real person space, real people with real influence.
Yeah. Yeah. So influencer marketing at a high level is about taking somebody who has a sphere of influence, connecting them with a brand, and then allowing that consumer to consumer sort of promotion or visibility to happen. And then Statusphere's unique take on that is really to kind of focus down on these micro influencers who are not the Kim Kardashians of the world, have a much smaller sphere of influence, but their influence may well actually be more powerful at the individual level or on a person by person basis. As I was preparing for our conversation, I was doing some research into influencer marketing in general, and I came across a survey from Influencer Marketing Hub titled "The State of Influencer Marketing in 2022." The survey found that the expected market size for 2022 is 16.4 billion US dollars. That's up from 13.8 billion 1 year before. And if you look back at 2016, when they first started doing that survey, the market was estimated at 1.7 billion. So that's an increase of almost tenfold over the last 6 years. To what do you attribute all of that growth? Why has the influencer marketing market grown the way it has?
Yeah, so I think there's about probably like a threefold answer. So you first have just the sheer factor that almost anyone can sphere of influence now. You can create one. So you have things like TikTok, which is allowing even more so than even Instagram previously to allow a more average person to create a pretty meaningful sphere of influence. So you have like that piece. So the creator economy is just booming. People now want to be creators. People understand, even people who have full-time jobs doing one thing, they'll passionately talk about and influence their friends in their passionate areas. If they get really into skincare, or if they get really into cars, or it's just really kind of changed, where now they actually have channels where they can talk about these things. So you have that happening at a very quick rate, and new platforms popping up like TikTok, Instagram's iterating with Reels, all of that. But then on top of that, you have some like macroeconomic kind of things happening. So you have the big players in the space right now in the marketing space. The three biggest places people put their ad spend are, you got Google, you have Facebook, and you have Amazon. And at the end of the day, like there's a lot of regulatory things and pressures happening with all those. On top of that, you have things like the iOS updates that happened to Apple. If you're not familiar with it, essentially what it did was it took marketers' ability to track their advertising efforts way down, which essentially means that marketers are now spending more money to reach less people. So it's because all those costs per acquisition went up so much on those channels, marketers are looking elsewhere and realizing that influencer marketing and using creators is actually one of the best ways that they can spend their money. And they're really seeing the ROI from that by diversifying their ad spend from these other channels. So I think that those are the main reasons why we're seeing this happen. It was already happening before that, but then those two kind of large things have really accelerated that.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting about the creator piece, because I feel like there's actually kind of two elements you were hitting on then there. One is sort of the proliferation of platforms that make it relatively easy for an average person to develop some sort of a sphere of influence. But I think there's also nested in that answer also like a shift in terms of how people think about connections, right? Which has been going on for a long time, which is this move of moving our connections online. And I do think there's a sense, and I'm talking about this anecdotally as somebody who's almost 40 years old, right? So I'm not necessarily the target market for a lot of this activity, but I feel that there's a shift, even for folks who may be my age, where becoming more engaged in social media, particularly around specific interests, is a thing. Like I find myself more willing to post things like I'm really into running, and so all of a sudden I have this interest, and it's something I've started to post about. I've started to post about running, and my following is tiny, but it's there, right? And so I feel like there's kind of two pieces to that shift in the creator market, where there's a technology piece, but there's also a cultural shift. Does that bear out in your own experience?
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. I also think it's become like more normal to post something and tag the brand that you really like and you resonate with, more so than you would have 5, 6 years ago. Like all the brands are now on there. So it's kind of like hit this tipping point. And it's funny you said the running thing. That's an example I give all the time of like, really talking about who is influencing your buying decisions. Or if you saw a buddy of yours that you were in a running club with post about a pair of running shoes and talk about how great they are, or versus like a professional athlete talk about how great they are, you're actually going to believe your buddy more because like him, you relate to him, he's more like you. And that's why I think too we've also seen this trend to micro. When I started doing influencer marketing, I used to have to beg brands, like I would show them the data, the micros worked better, but they're like, we only want 10,000 more plus followers only. And now it's shifted. Now brands say, we don't want the big ones, we actually want the smaller ones. So it's a big mindset shift, I think, partly to what you're saying there.
I think it's funny as you say that, like there's an example coming to mind. There's a fellow that I met, a fellow, I just say his first name, Will, who does not have a major following online. And then all of a sudden, about 2 weeks ago, I saw that he announced that he's an ambassador for a couple of different brands. And I was like, what in the world? Like, Will's not a professional runner. Like, how is Will engaged in these relationships with these brands? And I think you just answered my question for me, because it's something that's been in the back of my mind. Like, how has Will connected with these brands? But I guess he's in that. He's now a micro influencer is what's happened there.
Exactly. And that's really like, it's like my dream with Statusphere is creating a place where essentially everyone who has influence can leverage it to find those brand partnerships and create like win-win relationships on both sides.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned a moment ago as we were talking about the growth in influencer marketing is some of the pressures within the industry. And I wondered if we could pull back to that for just a moment. What do you think is unique about the current moment that is causing influencer marketing to be something that brands should think about right now? What are some of those unique pressures that are making influencer marketing a more advantageous investment than alternatives, perhaps like ad spend?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how often you talk to marketers, but right now marketers are having a moment essentially because what happened was they got fed the drug of Facebook ads and they got used to I pay X dollars for an ad and I get X dollars for a sale and that's how I get my return and that's what how we crank our spend. Well, when this huge update happened to the iOS system, not only but even before then the cost was going up with ads, but then this giant update happened, which essentially made the tracking not as good. So just digging in there too, if you're not familiar, like you probably noticed on your iPhone now, it asks you if you want people to see your data so that the marketers can track you. And I can't remember the stat, but it's well over half of people are opting out of that. So marketers now have a huge blind spot, and a blind spot in marketing means wasted money because you can't optimize as well. So now all these marketers just their spends are going up so high that they actually can't even rationalize. Some of them they lose money on Facebook now. Like they spend, and for every dollar spent, they're losing 50 cents because of the
Mm.
changes. And the marketers that are doing best are ones that have already prepared and diversified between multiple marketing channels. But one of the biggest marketing channels that helps, I think, mitigate the risk and why we've seen so many people move to it is influencer marketing and building the relationships with creators and essentially building other marketing channels so you don't have to rely solely on Facebook ads, Google ads, the ones that were pulling most of the ad spend before.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like a lot of these privacy focused changes, whether they're iOS changes or, there's a lot of privacy focused changes happening that are
Hmm.
coming out of the European Union and in other parts of the world,
Hmm.
California and other places. It sounds like those are really driving, making, that buying traffic, effectively buying eyeballs via ads is becoming more and more expensive, less and less effective. And so influencer marketing becomes
Exactly.
a attractive alternative because the trust is so high and it's just much more effective or becoming more and more effective relative to these other options.
It takes essentially 7 touches is the average to convert a customer from their first time seeing a brand to when they actually convert. So we tell our brands it all the time: 7 touches, right? So a lot can happen in those 7 touches. One can be an ad, one could be a creator placement, one could be their best friend telling
Mm.
them, one could be a text message, And I just think that also the shift in how people are learning about brands has changed at the same time as this ad spend piece has happened. And there's also studies showing that a viewpoint or a touch point in that 7 of like a creator or like an influencer that you respect posting is almost more heavily weighted than an ad, which makes total sense. You're going to trust that more than an ad.
Mm.
So it can help shorten that life cycle and mean more as well.
Yeah. So I want to find out about your personal story with influencer marketing as well. So can you tell us a bit about how you first came to be involved in influencer marketing?
Yeah, so I actually started a blog when I was in college, and I've always loved marketing. I had a professor tell me he told the whole class, but I guess I took it to heart. He said that
Mm.
if you wanted to actually learn about marketing, you should start a blog, and you'll learn more about that than you will in
Hmm.
your classes, and just start it on anything. So I actually went home that night, started a blog, and I believe that it was the best advice I've ever gotten because I learned how to build a website, learned how
Absolutely.
to market it. I got really into content marketing because I just found it fun and I just wanted to build that up. And then I actually started working with brands on my own blog. So it was just a fun passion project. It was like a recipe baking blog that was just for fun. But I got
Mhm.
to work with even brands like Coca Cola and Hershey's, and I got to see how those collaborations worked. I got to join some creator networks. So I was really seeing it from that side. And then at the same time, I started working at an agency where my job was to do the flip side of it, which was reach out to creators. So I started getting on a lot of these platforms as an influencer and as a brand. And that's where kind of my wheel started spinning to being like, there's some pain points on both sides that need to be solved. And then I kind of came up with the idea for Statusphere and sat on it for a little while before having the guts to kind of make the jump and do it. But that was where kind of that all started.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, way back in college, this marketing professor gives you, which what I agree was fantastic advice. Go out there and put yourself out there and try and, grow a website or grow a blog and you'll learn more that way. But I'm curious what those first interactions with brands, as far as you can remember, like what were those first interactions like? And what I'm wondering about is, like, did you go seek out brands? Were you just like reading about marketing in general and they were like, hey, there are things called like brand ambassadors? Like, how did that happen? How did the idea come to mind? And then how did you start to get involved?
Yeah, so this was all around 2010 timeframe to kind of give a stamp on it. So it was such a different landscape back then. So think about it. Instagram had like
Yeah.
just come out. It wasn't even really a big thing. I was actually built a lot of my following on Facebook or on a Facebook page. So just like laying the landscape. And blogging was much bigger than like Instagram, much, much bigger at the time in terms of the creator space. And so I created the blog. The first thing that you do when you create a blog, especially if you get really into it, is you start building a community of other bloggers. You start seeing what they're doing that works. You start talking to them. That's one of like the first places I start. And then I would find these bloggers that were big, and I would see like them getting brand collaborations, and then finding out how they did
Mm.
it, and kind of like that's where the whole ball started rolling. So in the beginning, the
Mhm.
collaborations that I got, I remember like even just getting the first free product in exchange for posting. That was so exciting to me. And then I joined some of the
Right.
networks and applied for collaborations, and then I just started cold pitching brands myself, and learned kind of, especially once I
Okay.
learned what the brands were looking for as a brand, it made it pretty easy to like pitch and know what value I brought.
Yeah. So you came into influencer marketing very organically or very naturally, right? You have your own blog out there. You are trying to develop that blog over time. You see other bloggers engaged in influencer marketing, so you kind of follow in their footsteps. And then at the same time, on a parallel track, you join a marketing agency and you're seeing that relationship from the other side, where you're out there trying to find influencers and pair them up and make the relationship happen from that direction. And this creates the idea of Statusphere in your mind. So then at
Mhm.
some point you say, all right, it's time to hit go on this idea. When you launch Statusphere, is that just like you in your apartment, or did you go out and get funding? What did that launch process look like?
Yeah, so I had the idea for like probably about 2 years. I had the domain name for a year, like before I started. So I even knew
Hmm.
what name I wanted to do and everything. And then when I finally pulled the trigger, essentially there was just a tipping point for me that was like, okay, if I don't do this and somebody else does, I'm gonna always regret it. So let's just try and see what happens.
Mm.
So I did it as a side hustle. I still had a full-time job at a marketing agency at the time. And I threw together a landing page where essentially it had an application to become a creator or an influencer with Statusphere, and we would ship you a box of products in exchange for posting. I didn't have any boxes. I even put a rendering up that looked pretty
Okay.
real. So when I say it was just like this is a test, I just wanted to see if there was a
Yeah.
market for this, because I was like, the only way there's a market for where my idea comes into play is if the creators will post, right? Then I can sell it to brands. So I messaged, DM'd it, and emailed it to a handful of creators that I followed that didn't know me personally. And I just said like, hey, check out this new network, you can join. And I think I DM'd it to like, I don't know, 5 to 10. And the next morning I had like 12 to 15 applications. And I was like, okay,
Oh,
that's a
wow.
good sign. They already shared it with their
Yeah.
friends. So I was like,
Hmm.
that was the tipping point for me to be like, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this out. So essentially started it with just some investment of my own. It wasn't a lot, just to get at least the MVP, like very minimum viable product out there.
Hmm.
And actually, in the office I'm sitting in right now is where I started shipping out products to the creators. And then over time, as I realized what the market was, realized how to make this scalable and that it could scale, that's when I decided to go the venture backed route and realized essentially I wanted to make this a venture backable company and essentially make it as big as I could. So that's where we went that
Yeah.
route and ended up bringing on investors.
Yeah, so that first box, you've got that first box that's not even a real box. You just kind of drew it up yourself. What products were in there? Like, did you already have brands on board?
No, I had no brand. I literally, it was just a teal box on a landing page. Yeah, I said like join the network and you'll get a box, pretty teal box. It's up there with products in exchange for posting, and that's all it
Mm.
started with. So I just really wanted to
Okay, all
know,
right.
would they apply? Like my acquisition essentially. Can I
Yeah,
acquire these creators to join my network? So,
right. Yeah, like a proof of concept there. So then,
mhm.
you've got, 12 applications in the first day. Is that the point at which you started trying to go out and find brands that were interested in working with you?
Yeah, so that was when I started. I actually, the very first box I sent, because I worked at an agency, I was able to reach out to a few brands and just I didn't have them pay or anything. I was just like, I just want some product to ship to these creators to get them posting. So I sent them all some product just to prove that they would post,
Mm.
so that then I could show that content to more brands to actually get them to pay for campaigns. So that was how I went about that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting because one of the things, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but one of the things that I was thinking about as I was thinking about Stratosphere is you really have two sets of customers, right? Like you've got your influencers who you need to attract who want to be part of your network. And then you've also got the brands who you need to attract also want to be part of your network, right? And I'm going to come back to that, but that's really interesting. The idea that you went after the influencer first, created that product, which you could then turn around and offer to the brand. So that's a really interesting dynamic that I want to come back to. But before we do, the other piece that we've been talking about is the growth of Statusphere. And I wanted to ask about that. So I know that Statusphere has grown a lot, especially over the last couple of years. As I was doing some research, I think your team has grown from about 10 people to over 50, really just in the last 2 years or so. So what sort of challenges have you faced as you've tried to scale up Statusphere from those, very humble beginnings of yourself, just kind of trying out a proof of concept to where you're at today with a team of 50 plus team members?
Yeah, so every stage of, I guess, the life cycle of the business, it comes with completely different challenges. I think the only thing I've learned is that the more you learn, the more you feel like you don't know. So, which I guess I always love that comparison. There's like a chart where it says like, what you think you know and what you actually know, and then once you actually know more, you realize like I don't know anything. So as somebody starting a
Absolutely.
company, and I feel like other founders probably can relate, and most of the time they relate to this. It's just like every stage though, it's just incredible. I feel like I learn so much every month, every day almost. But at the same time, then you have all new challenges that like you just were never even expecting the next day. But it's also, I think, what a lot of personalities that are drawn to entrepreneurship, like I just love, problem solving and figuring out those challenges overall. I would say some of the biggest challenges, like in the very beginning with the, like you have the MVP, and then it's like building your first few team players and building out that core founding team essentially, I think was like the first biggest challenge. I was just like so fortunate to find the most amazing founding team. So our leadership team consists of myself. We have an operations, our chief operations officer, and then our chief technical officer, so we could actually build out a full state of the art platform, which we have today. So that was like the first big challenge. And then once getting those into place, I would say the next big phase was, really making sure you have product market fit. So like hearing from your customers, figuring out like, are we going after if this customer is leaving, is it because they're the wrong persona, or is it because we need to fix our products? And really understanding that piece was like the next, I think, biggest stage of the company. And then I would say now we're in growth mode. So growth mode has been like a completely different animal. And essentially, I mean, we brought on, I can't even remember, like 15, 20 people last quarter or something, or like, I don't know. We're have people hiring all the time. I don't even know what's happening. Going from like where everybody and we can all fit into one tiny room to like, oh my gosh, wait, what's her name on the team? She just started and I didn't even get to meet her first, So that challenge is like right now we're in like the recruiting challenge, which is a whole nother different animal. So
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. When I joined Kinsta, we were a team of about 15, and I just joined as an individual contributor. I joined as a support engineer, and today we're a team of about 250. And yeah, I mean, it's every step of the way. It's like I started to think, well, I recognized there were things I did not know, but I really had no idea how little I knew, right? Like it's funny. Like one of the things that's coming to me right now, I've been at Kinsta for 6 years now, and I've been managing a team of in some fashion for, I don't know, most of that time. And, it's one of those things where as we're going through some different leadership development stuff and different management training to try and upscale our managers, I'm sitting here going, I've been doing this for like 5 years, and I'm realizing how much I don't know what I'm doing, right? Like how much I still have to learn about this thing I've been doing for years, right?
yeah.
So the second piece, the second piece there that we were talking about was this sort of balance between having brands as your customers and having influencers as your customers. Statusphere's in this like unique matchmaker position, as I see it, between those two different groups. And so thinking about potentially conflicting priorities or points of view in these two sets of customers, what are some of the challenges that has posed for Statusphere?
Yeah, for sure. And we view it the same way. Like the matchmaking is the core of what we do. We're kind of like a dating app actually from like a technology
Mm.
perspective because we take into account everything the brand is looking for and then everything the creator is looking for. And I think to your point kind of earlier when you were talking about like I saw the problem on the creator side and started there. That's actually one of the main fundamental values of our business is that we're member first. So we want to be people first overall, but if we're making a product decision, we want to make sure that there's a benefit to the member, which was something I felt was a huge gap in the market in terms of other platforms
Mm.
built everything for the brands and they kind of left the members like hanging. And that's how I felt as
Mm.
someone on the platform. So that's something just like when I'm looking at kind of and having to decide, I guess, when you're saying like splitting your time, we do look at it like we're nothing without our members. So we need to make sure we're bringing them the best value and the best experience possible. So we try not to, jeopardize that or compromise that as much as possible with our product decisions. So that's one way. And then I think just in terms of the logistical ways that we focus on both sides is just how we've split up our departments and our teams. So we have, our team dedicated that's member facing and brand facing. So we have like essentially like customer success team on the brand side and we have a member success team on the member side and making sure that we have people that have KPIs attached to both of those things so that we can grow them both at the same time. And just like on the sales side for the brand side we have a team that's looking for new brands and going after that and they have those KPIs. And then on the member side we want to foster constantly new applications, things like that. We do have a wait list and we have to go through it constantly and approve people from it as we have more opportunities that match them. So luckily when you do have a platform that works with influencers, it's like you get to work with the social butterflies of the world that we can almost leverage our platform to get more of them. So to my point earlier, when I told 10 of them and got 15 applicants, we've actually run campaigns on our own platform to get creators talking about Statusphere to get more creators, and it works incredibly well.
Mm.
So that's one of the core ways that we grow our member side. And then on the brand side, we have a full team for that as well.
That member first approach strikes me as actually also being brand first in a sense, right? Because that member first approach ensures that your influencers are engaged with your platform, are excited to be using it, which will translate into them being better ambassadors for the brands that they represent. So it strikes me that in having that member first mentality, you really are also taking care of the brands at the same time. Is that how you think about that perspective?
I think that's completely correct. So essentially, it's like our brands don't have anything if we don't have our members. So it does serve our brands well as well. And we've had brands reach out to us and say like, I tried to reach out to this creator and they didn't post about me, but she claimed it through Statusphere. And it's like, oh, that's because we worked with her so long and she trusts us. So it's just a different experience, and I think that kind of shows how it ends up benefiting the brand.
Kristen, as we start to wrap our conversation to a close, I have a couple of wrap up questions for you. So the first one is, what is a resource you would recommend to our listeners? So this could be a blog or a newsletter or a book, a conference, really anything that you think is a go-to resource for you that our listeners should check out.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know. I guess your listeners are kind of across the board in terms of audience. I would say fellow founders or people running a company, especially a venture backed one. I recently read a book. It's by a like CEO coach. It's called like The Great CEO Within. It's one of the most actionable books I've ever read, and it works for anyone in leadership positions looking to grow a company. I think it's by far one of the best ones there. And then I guess in terms of other resources, I mean, not to plug our own stuff, but if you're looking for more content, we have the most awesome content team that I've ever seen. So our blog, joinstatus.com, if you go there and click on our blog, we publish 8+ pieces of content per month. And it's always on what's the best topic that's happening that month.
All right. So the book was The Great CEO
Great
Within. Is
CEO
that right?
Within. Correct.
Great CEO Within, and then check out the Join Status or the Statusphere
Mhm.
blog for, particularly, I assume it's very focused on influencer marketing.
I would say marketers in general will find a lot of value there.
Awesome. Okay. Well, then just to take us out, so where can our listeners go to either connect with you or to learn more about Statusphere?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn, another place with tons of influencers on it in a different category that people don't think about. But I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn. I do actually have a newsletter on there that I publish. I put out a lot of really great content that I work pretty hard on with our team, and our team works really hard on. So it's a really great place to follow me there. Also, I love connecting with people. So if you connect with me and say that you heard with me on this podcast, I will definitely accept you. If you need to ask me any questions about marketing, always happy to answer them there. So find me on LinkedIn, Kristen Wiley. You can find it there. And then you can find us, on all the platforms, as you can probably imagine, with Statusphere. So we're on everything from Instagram to TikTok to LinkedIn. You can find all those links on our website at joinstatus.com.
All right, perfect. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for joining me on Reverse Engineered today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you to our listeners. That's all for today's podcast. You can access the episode show notes at kinsta.com/podcast. That's KINSTA.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Reverse Engineered and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform you're listening on right now. See you next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Reverse Engineered, the podcast on all things business and tech. Reverse Engineered is brought to you by Kinsta. Kinsta's premium WordPress hosting can speed up your website by up to 200%. And you'll get 24/7 support from our expert WordPress engineers. Let us show you the Kinsta difference at kinsta.com.